So I want you to imagine you're sitting at this tiny, slightly cramped table.
Hmm.
You're in a bustling foreign city. Maybe it's this dimly lit trattoria in Rome or
A really noisy izakaya in
yeah.
Tokyo.
Yeah, exactly. Or just a fast-paced diner in New York. The air is thick with like the smell of garlic and frying oil. Plates are clattering
I could
everywhere.
picture it. It's overwhelming.
Right. And then the waiter approaches your table, pen in hand, maybe tapping their foot just a little bit.
Pressure is on.
The pressure is totally on. And they ask you a rapid fire question in a language you have, maybe been studying for 3 months?
Yeah, barely enough time to get your bearings.
Exactly. And you've got your meticulously highlighted textbook in your bag. You know all the grammar rules.
You spent all Sunday memorizing that chart, right? Subject, verb, object.
Oh, yeah. You nailed the chart. But in that exact moment, under the fluorescent lights and the expectant gaze of an actual native speaker,
Yeah.
that strict architectural blueprint of the language it totally evaporates. Your brain just flatlines.
Oh, man. It is the universal nightmare of the language learner.
It really is.
Because you step out of that sterile, perfectly controlled environment of a classroom or, a language app.
Right, where everything is safe.
Exactly. And you step into this communicative landscape that is inherently chaotic. I mean, the real world is loud, it is fast, and it absolutely does not care about your flashcards.
It does not care at all. And that paralyzing deer in the headlights moment at the restaurant table, that is exactly why we are dissecting our source material today. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the surprisingly profound mechanics of how we actually acquire language.
And we are going to do it through what is arguably the most universal, visceral, and frankly delicious topic imaginable.
Food.
Food, yes. Which makes perfect sense when you look at the source material we're working with today.
Right, so let's set that up. Today we're analyzing a very specific curriculum guide and lesson framework. It's titled Conversational English for Discussing Favorite Foods.
Yeah, and before we really get into the psychology of it, we need to establish exactly who this curriculum's built for.
Important context.
Yeah, because the source explicitly states it is designed for beginners and early intermediate learners.
Okay, so in the standardized language framework, we're talking about the A1 to B1 level.
Exactly.
Now, for you listening, if you aren't familiar with those specific linguistic designations, like what A1 or B1 actually means, let's paint a picture of what that sounds like in the wild.
Yeah, it's a really critical distinction to make. An A1 learner is at the absolute ground floor.
Like day one.
Pretty much. If you are an A1 speaker, you are essentially dealing in isolated nouns and rehearsed survival phrases.
You can point at a menu and say, water, please.
Right, or where is bathroom?
Yeah.
You are relying entirely on the listener's charity to understand your context.
I have to do a lot of the heavy lifting.
A lot of it. But by the time you reach B1, you're in what we call the threshold level.
Okay, so what does the threshold look like?
Well, you could survive a trip. You can string together independent thoughts and you can describe past events. But, and this is the really crucial part, you are still translating heavily in your head.
Oh, right. You're doing the mental gymnastics.
Exactly. You don't have the fluidity to express your actual adult personality. You often feel like this very complex, intelligent person.
Trapped inside a toddler's vocabulary.
Yes. It is an incredibly frustrating, fragile stage of development.
Fragile is the perfect word for it because the
Yeah.
core premise of this source material, like the real stakes of what we are unpacking today, is that pushing a learner from A1 to B1 isn't a matter of just giving them more grammar rules.
No, not at all.
It's not about studying English as a mathematical equation. It is about experiencing the language.
Yes.
It's about leveraging the stories, the memories, and the raw emotions connected to food to trick the brain into communicating naturally.
It is a massive paradigm shift in pedagogy. I mean, if you look at a lesson plan titled Discussing Favorite Foods, your first instinct might be to just dismiss it.
Right. It sounds a little basic.
Yeah, talking about whether you prefer pizza or sushi seems, on the surface, incredibly elementary. It feels like a throwaway Friday afternoon exercise.
Let's just talk about pizza so we can go home.
Exactly. But when we look at the cognitive science behind it, we realize it is actually a highly strategic gateway.
How so?
Well, when we ask a learner to talk about food, we are intentionally bypassing some of the most stubborn cognitive roadblocks that paralyze the human brain during language acquisition.
Okay, I want to challenge the mechanics of that because that brings us right into our first major area of exploration today. Why food?
Right.
Our source material explicitly targets this A1 to B1 demographic with topics like pizza, sushi, or spicy dishes to boost everyday English practice.
Yes, very specific choices.
But if the goal is just to get people talking, why is food the ultimate icebreaker? Why not the weather? Or giving directions or asking what someone does for a living?
To understand why food is the literal skeleton key for this specific demographic, we have to look under the hood at what is physically happening in the brain.
Okay, let's get into the neuroscience.
When a beginner language learner tries to speak, especially at the A1 to B1 level, the single biggest hurdle they face is cognitive overload.
Meaning there is simply too much computational data trying to squeeze through a very narrow mental bandwidth.
Precisely. Let's go back to your opening scenario at the restaurant. Imagine you are the learner, and someone asks you a really simple question.
Like, what do you want to eat?
Right. Your brain doesn't just formulate an answer. First, your auditory cortex has to decode the foreign sounds.
Okay.
Then you have to translate those sounds into your native language just to understand the meaning.
Step 2.
Then you have to generate a response in your native language. Then you search your mental dictionary for the English equivalents of those words.
I'm getting exhausted just listening to the steps.
And we aren't done. Then your prefrontal cortex tries to arrange those English words according to complex abstract grammar rules.
Right, so you're checking verb conjugations, subject-verb agreement.
Pluralization,
Yes.
exactly. And finally, your motor cortex has to coordinate the muscles in your mouth to produce sounds that are totally alien to your jaw.
Wow. It's a miracle anyone ever speaks a second language at all.
It really is.
You are essentially asking the brain to perform high-level calculus in real time while simultaneously trying to maintain eye contact and look like you're having a casual, relaxed time.
And that extreme computational effort, it triggers a very real biological response.
Like a stress response.
Exactly. When the brain detects that level of cognitive strain, coupled with the social anxiety of potentially looking foolish, the amygdala activates.
The threat detection center.
Yes. It releases a massive spike of cortisol. And in linguistics, we refer to the psychological manifestation of this as the affective filter.
The affective filter. I've heard that term used as a sort of catch-all for learner anxiety, but you're saying it's a literal biological barrier.
It acts exactly like a physical wall. When your affective filter is high due to anxiety, self-doubt, or just lack of motivation, your brain's ability to acquire and process new language shuts down.
Completely.
The fight-or-flight response takes over,
Hmm.
and the memory centers of the hippocampus are essentially blocked.
Oh, wow.
You could be living in London, surrounded by English 24/7, but if your affective filter is constantly elevated, that language will bounce right off you.
Yeah.
Nothing gets absorbed.
So, connecting this back to the curriculum, the strategic choice of food is designed to lower that cortisol spike.
Exactly. How do we lower the shield? We introduce a topic that demands zero abstract philosophical reasoning.
Right.
And instead, we tap directly into a shared, universal, and deeply pleasurable human experience.
Mm.
Every single human being eats. Every human being has a memory associated with a favorite meal. When you ask someone about their favorite spicy dish from their hometown, the motivation to share that personal history
To share that piece of their identity.
is so intrinsic that it overrides the anxiety. The desire to connect over a shared love of pizza literally suppresses the affective filter.
Okay, I see the logic there, but let me push back on the actual application of this.
Sure.
Because while lowering anxiety is great, doesn't keeping the conversation restricted to basic topics like I eat pizza or sushi is good essentially trap the learner in a kiddie pool?
The plateau problem.
Right. If we are constantly catering to their comfort zone to avoid cognitive overload, how do we ensure they actually graduate to complex thought?
It's a very valid critique.
Are we just teaching them to play the linguistic equivalent of Wonderwall on the guitar over and over without ever teaching them how to read actual sheet music?
That is exactly the critique of communicative language teaching if it's executed poorly. However, the goal of this specific curriculum is not to keep them in the kiddie pool forever.
Okay.
The goal is to build a mechanical infrastructure. If we use a different metaphor, think of rote vocabulary and complex grammar rules as the raw, uncooked ingredients in a pantry.
I'm with you.
You can have all the ingredients in the world, but you can't cook a meal without heat. The emotional desire to talk about food, that intrinsic motivation, is the heat applied to the pan.
Oh, I like that. So the subject matter is simple, but the biological process it triggers is the catalyst for actual learning.
Yes. when you remove the pressure of having to explain a complex, abstract concept like, say, macroeconomics or political philosophy.
Which no A1 learner wants to do anyway.
Right. The learner can then dedicate all of their cognitive resources to the physical mechanics of the language itself. They practice the rhythm of English.
They get used to the physical feeling of forming English vowels.
Exactly. They establish a neural groove. And once that structural groove is paved, they can easily swap out the simple vocabulary for complex vocabulary later on.
They aren't trapped in the simple topic. They're using the simple topic to build a scaffolding.
A scaffolding that will hold the heavy, complex thoughts later.
That reframes it entirely. You are giving them a highly motivating, low-stakes sandbox to master the tools before you ask them to build a skyscraper.
Precisely.
And that understanding forces us to look at the second major promise of this curriculum. Because the goal isn't just to get them to use the tools. The goal is to get them to use the tools naturally.
Yes, and that is a key word.
The source material explicitly states it will teach learners natural ways to answer, "What's your favorite food?" in real conversations.
You really need to interrogate that word, natural, because the gap between textbook English and real conversation English is vast.
It's a canyon.
And for an A1 or B1 learner, that gap can be incredibly jarring.
It's the difference between reading a script and having a conversation. We all know the classic textbook dialogue, right?
Oh, yeah.
A learner is taught that when asked, "What is your favorite food?" the correct response is, "Hello, my favorite food is the hamburger. I enjoy eating it very much."
Which is, structurally, a flawless sentence. I mean, the subject, verb, and object are perfectly aligned.
But if you, as a listener, were at a dinner party and the person next to you turned and delivered that sentence with flat, perfect pronunciation,
You would instinctively lean away.
right, it lacks all the markers of human spontaneity. It sounds like an artificial intelligence from 1995 trying to blend in.
Because native speakers,
Sure.
regardless of the language, do not converse by exchanging sterile data points.
Right.
When we look at the sociology of communication, especially around a topic as culturally loaded as food, the communication is messy.
It's filled with emotion.
It's filled with hesitations, and it's deeply contextual. A native English speaker doesn't declare the hamburger as their favorite food in a vacuum.
What do they actually say?
They say something like, "Oh man, honestly, I could eat a burger every single day of my life." Or, "You really can't beat a good slice of pizza."
Right, they use filler words. Oh man, honestly, they express enthusiasm before they even name the noun. And this touches on something really crucial about the question itself. When I ask you, "What's your favorite food?" I am not actually asking for a dietary data point.
No, you aren't conducting a census.
Right, I don't need a spreadsheet of your caloric intake. It is a social bid.
In human sociology, questions about food are almost always proxies. "What's your favorite food?" is actually a proxy for, "Tell me about where you grew up."
Tell me who you are.
Exactly. It's
Yep.
an invitation to share your culture, your personality, your family dynamics. And the robotic textbook answer. It shuts that social bid down completely.
It provides the data, but it rejects the invitation to connect.
Teaching learners natural ways to answer is really about teaching them how to accept the social bid.
But here is where I get completely stuck, and I need you to walk me through the paradox of this pedagogy.
Okay, lay it on me.
We are telling A1 and B1 learners that they need to sound spontaneous, messy, and natural. But to achieve that, the curriculum literally has them sitting in front of a screen, artificially studying and memorizing phrases like, "I'm a big fan of," or "I absolutely love."
Right.
How on earth do you take a phrase you wrote memorized from a PDF and deliver it out loud without sounding like you were reading a hostage demand? How do you fake spontaneity?
It is the central paradox of all language learning. And honestly, it's the exact same paradox that professional actors wrestle with every day.
Like stage actors.
Yeah. Think about the Stanislavski method of acting. How does an actor walk on stage, deliver a line they have rehearsed 600 times in their living room, and make the audience believe the thought just occurred to them in that very second?
They don't just memorize the syllables, they internalize the motivation behind the line.
Exactly. They attach genuine emotion to the rehearsed words. And that is the exact mechanism this curriculum is trying to trigger.
Wow, okay.
Natural delivery in a second language does not come from the perfection of the pronunciation. It comes from the emotional weight behind the vocabulary.
So you don't just memorize the syntactic structure of, "I'm a big fan of spicy food."
No. You are instructed to connect that specific phrase to the memory of the best, most face-melting bowl of curry you ever had in your life.
Right.
When the emotion in your brain is real, your vocal cords naturally alter their pitch, your cadence shifts, and the delivery becomes authentic. The memorized words just become a vehicle for a genuine feeling.
Which means the vocabulary they are memorizing cannot just be a list of boring nouns.
Exactly.
If we are relying on genuine emotion to create natural delivery, the words themselves have to evoke something real. And that pulls us right into the third layer of the source material, engaging the senses.
This is a huge component.
The curriculum makes a major point of moving learners beyond basic verbs like and want, providing them with easy words to describe how food tastes, smells, and makes you feel.
This is where we cross over from linguistic theory into the hard neuroscience of memory retention, which is, to me, the most fascinating part of this entire framework.
Let's get into it.
When a learner is trying to retain new vocabulary, abstract words, words that describe concepts, times, or complex states of being, are notoriously slippery.
They're hard to remember.
The brain struggles to anchor them because there is no physical corollary. But vocabulary tied to the senses is processed by an entirely different biological pathway.
We are talking about the olfactory system, right? The sense of smell, and the gustatory system, the sense of taste.
Yes.
I know smell is deeply tied to memory, but how does that actually help someone remember an English vocabulary word?
To understand the power of this, you, as a listener, need to consider how your brain is physically wired. Of all your five senses, smell is the only one that bypasses the thalamus.
What does the thalamus do?
It acts as the brain's sensory relay station. Usually data goes there first, but when you smell something, the olfactory bulb has a direct, unfiltered neurological hotline straight to the amygdala, which processes emotion, and the hippocampus, which forms memories.
So it's literally a biological shortcut.
An instantaneous shortcut. This is why you can walk past a bakery, catch a whiff of cinnamon, and suddenly vividly remember a specific morning in your grandmother's kitchen from 20 years ago.
The memory is practically violent in its clarity.
Exactly.
I have that exact experience with the smell of damp pine needles. It instantly drops me back into a camping trip I took when I was 8 years old. I don't just remember it, I physically feel it.
Right. Now, apply that biological superpower to language learning. When a curriculum introduces a sensory word like crispy, savory, bitter, or spicy, and asks the learner to associate that word with a specific food memory,
They are hijacking that direct hotline to the hippocampus.
they aren't just looking at a flashcard that says spicy equals hot. They are recalling the physical sensation of capsaicin burning their tongue.
This sweat on their forehead, the endorphin rush.
By the time they articulate the word spicy, the vocabulary word is anchored not just in their cognitive memory, but in their physical body.
It fundamentally changes the durability of the language. Let's look at the practical application of this. Our source material wants to elevate the conversation for these A1, B1 learners. Let's use sushi as an example, since the curriculum highlights it. If a beginner doesn't have sensory vocabulary, if they only have nouns and basic adjectives, how do they describe sushi?
Well, if they are limited to the most basic descriptors, they might say something objectively true but completely unevocative. They might say, it is cold fish and rice.
Cold fish.
Yeah,
Which is technically accurate, but from a culinary and social perspective, it sounds horrific.
it does.
If you tell me your favorite food is cold fish, I am going to assume you are a penguin. It completely fails to communicate the actual experience of the meal.
It's a failure of translation, not of language, but of experience. But watch what happens when we equip that same A1 or B1 learner with just a few easy, highly evocative sensory words.
Okay, like what?
We aren't asking them to read a C2 level culinary review from a Michelin-starred critic. We just give them words like fresh, delicate, sharp, and sticky.
Just those 4 words completely transform the landscape of the sentence.
Exactly. Now the learner can say, the fish is so fresh and delicate, the rice is a little sticky, and the wasabi has a really sharp bite.
The phrase sharp bite alone elevates the English to such a natural, native-sounding level.
It does.
And it proves that you don't need a massive academic vocabulary to sound fluent. You just need the right sensory triggers. You go from delivering a sterile data point, cold fish, to transmitting an entire sensory experience to the listener.
And this capability, the ability to vividly describe the food you desire, naturally propels the learner out of the theoretical and into the practical.
Right, because once you can visualize and articulate the food you want, The immediate next step in the human experience is to go out into the world and actually acquire it.
Which brings a whole new level of anxiety into the mix.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a section of the curriculum I really want to tear into because it represents a massive escalation in stakes. Section 4 of our outline, high-stakes practicality. The lesson specifically includes friendly phrases for ordering at restaurants, and it frames this as essential everyday English.
It is essential, but it is also one of the most psychologically complex environments a language learner can enter.
We really need to look closely at the psychology of the restaurant interaction because for a non-native speaker, a restaurant is not a place of relaxation.
No, it is an unscripted, high-stakes theatrical performance.
Let's put you, the listener, in those shoes again. You have your sensory vocabulary. You know you want the crispy fries and the savory burger, but now you have to walk into an environment you do not control.
It's terrifying.
The waiter approaches. They are a native speaker. They are probably rushed, maybe speaking with a regional dialect or using local slang. The menu is a labyrinth of culinary terms.
And there's loud music playing over the speakers.
There's a table of people next to you laughing. The sensory input is overwhelming.
That affective filter we discussed earlier. In a busy restaurant, it threatens to go through the roof.
It's spiking.
The fight-or-flight response is fully activated just over the prospect of ordering a sandwich. The learner is terrified of mispronouncing a word, terrified the waiter won't understand them, terrified of holding up the line.
So, how does this curriculum address that panic? Because it explicitly focuses on teaching friendly phrases. It doesn't just teach the nouns on the menu, it teaches the framework of the interaction.
Right. By equipping learners with these specific phrases, things like, could I please have, or I'd like to order, the curriculum is providing them with an internalized script.
It's an anxiety reduction tool.
Exactly. When the waiter suddenly turns to them and says, what can I get started for you? The learner doesn't have to panic and try to invent a grammatically correct sentence from scratch while their cortisol levels are spiking.
They have a rehearsed, reliable syntactic shell.
They just deploy the phrase, I'll have the, and drop their vocabulary word at the end of it. It dramatically reduces the cognitive load in a high-stress moment.
But I want to pause on the word friendly. The curriculum specifically notes these are friendly phrases for ordering. This suggests we are dealing with something much deeper than just getting calories onto a plate.
Well, we are.
We are dealing with the invisible social rules of the English language.
We are dealing with pragmatics. Pragmatics is the study of how context influences meaning and how language is used in social situations.
Okay.
And English has very specific, often unwritten rules about politeness, especially in transactional environments like a restaurant.
Give me an example of how an A1 learner might violate those unwritten rules without meaning to.
The classic example is the direct translation of desire. In many languages, the direct equivalent of the English phrase, I want, is a perfectly polite, standard way to order food.
Right.
So a learner translates their native thought directly and says to the American or British waiter, I want a coffee.
And to a native English speaker, hearing, I want a coffee from a stranger, sounds incredibly abrupt.
It sounds rude.
It almost sounds demanding, like a child speaking to a parent.
Exactly. It violates the social hierarchy and the expectation of transactional politeness in English-speaking cultures.
Yeah.
The waiter might react coolly, the interaction becomes strained, and the learner, who has no idea they committed a pragmatic error, feels the negative energy.
Which damages their confidence.
Massively. So when the curriculum insists on teaching friendly phrases like I would like or could I get, it isn't just teaching grammar. It is handing the learner a cultural shield.
It ensures that the native speaker receives the learner warmly.
Yes.
And that warm reception is crucial for what happens next. But I have to ask the obvious question here.
Go for it.
If a restaurant is such a minefield of potential awkwardness, such a high-stress environment with complex pragmatic rules, why push A1 and B1 learners into it?
Why not wait?
Yeah, why are we sending beginners to the front lines? Wouldn't it be safer from a pedagogical standpoint to keep them in the classroom, keep them in the safe sandbox until they're at a C1 advanced level and they can easily handle a waiter rattling off the daily specials and asking about dietary restrictions?
It's a fair question. But if you wait for a language learner to be ready for the real world, they will never leave the classroom.
That's true.
Language is never perfect, and the real world is never controlled. The reason we push them into the restaurant environment early is because of the neurochemical reward system of the brain.
Okay, the reward system.
Surviving a real-world transaction, even a clunky, heavily accented, imperfect one, is the ultimate confidence booster.
Because there is a tangible result.
Exactly. You cannot simulate the victory of a real-world interaction in a classroom role play. When that learner stumbles through their friendly phrase and the waiter smiles and walks away, and 10 minutes later, a plate of exactly what they ordered is placed in front of them.
Wow.
The dopamine hit in the brain is astronomical. It is a massive influx of neurochemical validation.
The brain registers. I used the tool and the tool worked. I survived.
Yes, that single plate of food builds more resilience and confidence than 50 hours of textbook study.
The food literally becomes the physical manifestation of their linguistic success. You are eating the reward of your communication.
That's profound.
It really is. And that idea that true fluency requires navigating the unwritten cultural rules of English leads us directly into the most complex layer of our source material. We've covered the basics, the sensory words, the social pragmatics. Now, the curriculum introduces what I consider the final boss of language learning. Section 5, the secret code. Unlocking idioms and native expressions.
Idioms. They are the bane of every language learner's existence and simultaneously the most beautiful part of any language.
Our source material specifically highlights common food sayings and expressions native speakers use. Now, for you listening, let's establish why idioms are so terrifying.
Let's do it.
An idiom is a phrase where the literal meaning of the words has absolutely nothing to do with the actual meaning of the phrase. They defy logic. If I tell a beginner that a test was a piece of cake, their literal brain is going to wonder where the dessert is. If I say a secret was revealed because someone spilled the beans, they are going to look at the floor to see the mess.
It is entirely nonsensical to an outsider.
Right. So, if we are dealing with A1 and B1 learners who are already maxing out their cognitive load just trying to remember the past tense of irregular verbs, why on earth is this curriculum throwing non-literal idioms into the mix? Isn't that pedagogical sabotage?
On the surface, it seems completely counterintuitive to teach advanced metaphorical concepts to beginners. But the inclusion of food idioms serves a profound psychological purpose in the learner's journey.
What is it?
You have to understand that language is a walled garden. When you speak a language purely literally, using only textbook definitions, you are always an outsider looking in.
You're a tourist.
You are a tourist in the language. You can conduct transactions, but you do not belong.
You are a guest.
Yes. But idioms. Idioms are the cultural secret code. They are the shared history of the people who built the language. When a curriculum hands a beginner an idiom, it is handing them the key to the clubhouse door.
It's like being let in on an inside joke.
Exactly.
Think about how it feels when you join a new group of friends or start a new job. For the first few weeks, they make references and jokes you don't understand, and you feel isolated. But the moment you understand the inside joke, and better yet, the moment you successfully make the joke yourself, your identity within that group shifts.
You are no longer the new person. You are a participant.
That identity shift is exactly what we are aiming for. When an A1 learner correctly uses a phrase like piece of cake in a conversation with a native speaker, the native speaker's eyes light up.
It's a moment of shared cultural recognition.
It instantly breaks down the wall between fluent local and struggling foreigner.
And the fact that these are food idioms makes them uniquely accessible, right? Because even if the literal translation doesn't make logical sense, the imagery is universally understood.
We go back to the universal power of food.
Right. The imagery of a piece of cake immediately evokes something sweet, effortless, and universally enjoyed. The imagery of spilling the beans evokes a container suddenly breaking and a messy, chaotic release of dozens of tiny items that are impossible to quickly clean up.
The metaphors make sense on a visceral level, even to a beginner.
By teaching these idioms early, the curriculum is giving the learner a shortcut to feeling like a cultural insider, which breeds a very specific type of linguistic confidence.
And there's another byproduct of this too. Introducing idioms shows the learner that English isn't a rigid, terrifying mathematical equation that they have to solve perfectly.
Oh, that's a great point.
It shows them that the language is playful, it's colorful, it has a sense of humor. Native speakers are breaking the literal rules of the language all the time to create these fun, weird phrases.
Yes.
And if the native speakers are playing with the language, it grants the learner permission to experiment and play, too. It lowers the stakes of making a mistake.
That shift from rigid study to playful experimentation is the hallmark of a learner who is about to achieve real fluency.
Which brings us to the methodology. How do we actually build that playful, confident fluency over time? This leads us to Section 6, Mindset and Mechanics, the pedagogy of daily confidence.
Let's get into mechanics.
Our source material isn't just a list of vocabulary, it's an instruction manual for how to study. It emphasizes, and I'm quoting the curriculum here, tips to build your English-speaking confidence. It provides a very specific mantra for the learners. Listen, practice, speak English with confidence every single day. It also promotes the use of weekly lessons structured around storytelling and real dialogues.
We really need to unpack the phrase every single day because from a neurobiological standpoint, this is the only way adult language acquisition actually works.
Right.
Historically, the model for learning a language was the marathon cram session.
The classic high school or university model. You ignore the language all week, and then you sit down for 4 hours on a Sunday night, memorize 200 vocabulary words, ace a written test on Monday, and forget 90% of it by Wednesday.
Exactly. That model relies on short-term working memory, which is highly volatile. But true language acquisition, the ability to speak without translating in your head, relies on a process called neuroplasticity, specifically the mechanism of myelination.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What exactly is myelination, and what does it have to do with practicing English every day?
When you learn a new phrase, let's say you learn the phrase, "I'd like a slice of pizza," your brain creates a new neural pathway to connect the thought to the English words.
Okay.
At first, that pathway is weak. Imagine a dense, overgrown jungle. Your new phrase is a tiny, faint foot trail through the brush. It takes a lot of effort to walk down it, and if you don't use it, the jungle overgrows the trail in a matter of days.
That's the feeling of knowing you learned a word yesterday, but you just can't drag it out of your memory today. The path is overgrown.
Precisely. But when you practice that phrase every single day, you are repeatedly sending an electrical signal down that specific pathway.
You're walking the trail.
Right.
Yeah.
And the brain recognizes this repetitive use and responds by wrapping the neural pathway in a fatty substance called myelin.
Myelin.
Yes, myelin acts as an insulator, like the rubber coating on a copper wire. It thickens the pathway, prevents the electrical signal from leaking out, and drastically increases the speed at which the signal travels.
So you are literally paving the foot trail in the jungle. You lay down dirt, then gravel, and eventually, with enough daily repetition, you pave a superhighway. The thought instantly translates into English without any conscious effort.
Yes, but the biological catch is that myelination only occurs through consistent, frequent repetition.
The brain needs a reason to build the highway.
Exactly. The brain will not pave a superhighway for a path you only walk once a week, even if you walk it for 4 hours straight. 10 minutes of active engagement with English every single day is exponentially more effective for myelination than a 3-hour cram session on the weekend.
I understand the science, but I have to play devil's advocate regarding the human reality of this.
Fair enough.
Think about you, the listener, trying to adopt a new habit. Every single day is a terrifying mandate. Does the pressure of having to practice English every single day without fail risk massive burnout?
You can.
How do you maintain that level of intrinsic motivation when you don't have a teacher in front of you? What does daily practice actually look like when it's just you by yourself standing in your kitchen on a rainy Tuesday morning trying to talk to yourself about a bagel?
Burnout is the enemy of myelination, absolutely.
Hmm.
If your daily practice consists of sitting at a desk and reciting irregular verb conjugations, you will burn out in a week.
Your brain will reject it.
And this is exactly why the source material pairs the mandate of daily practice with this specific methodology of storytelling.
Storytelling as a study tool.
Storytelling is the antidote to burnout. Human brains are not biologically wired to retain isolated lists of data. We did not evolve to memorize spreadsheets.
No, we evolved around campfires.
Exactly. We evolved to remember narrative. We remember context, emotion, conflict, and resolution. So if your daily practice is listening to a short story about a chaotic, funny trip to a bakery, or trying to recount a memory of your own grandmother's cooking, you are engaging the emotional and narrative centers of the brain.
You aren't studying, you are participating in a story. It changes the daily interaction from a chore into a creative exercise.
It keeps the heat in the pan, to use our earlier metaphor.
It sustains the motivation required to keep paving those neural pathways.
Precisely.
But that brings up a logistical hurdle. Listening to stories is great, but passive consumption only gets you so far. Which brings us beautifully to the final and perhaps most ingenious tactic used in this source material.
Ah, yes. The active output.
Because practice is one thing, but producing the language yourself is another. Let's look at Section 7. Active output and the power of the digital community. The lesson we are analyzing doesn't just end with a good luck.
No, it has a very specific call to action.
It includes a very specific call to action for its audience. It says, watch the full video and leave a comment using this pattern. My favorite food is uses. It also leverages tags like hashtag English conversation and hashtag study English to build a digital ecosystem.
I really want to unpack the brilliance of this incredibly simple instruction because it solves the hardest problem in language learning.
Which is?
The most terrifying leap for any language student is the transition from passive consumption to active production.
Right. Passive consumption being listening to a podcast, watching a video, or reading a textbook. Active production being actually writing or speaking your own original thoughts.
Right. Passive consumption is safe. You are in control. If you don't understand something, you just rewind. But active production is stepping out onto a tightrope without a net.
It's totally vulnerable.
You are putting yourself on the record. You have to synthesize the grammar, the vocabulary, and the spelling all at once.
Yeah.
For an A1 learner, staring at a blank comment section and being told to write something in English is paralyzing.
The blank page is intimidating in your native language. In a second language, it's a brick wall. So how does this prompt dismantle that wall?
By providing the fill-in-the-blank pattern, my favorite food is, the curriculum creates a completely frictionless environment for immediate output. It removes almost all of the syntactic cognitive load.
They don't have to build the sentence.
The learner doesn't have to worry about how to conjugate the verb or whether to use a preposition or how to structure the subject and object. The architecture is already built for them. All they have to do is apply one single word or short phrase from their own life.
It acts as a set of training wheels. The sentence structure holds them upright, allowing them to just focus on the joy of pedaling.
That's a great way to put it.
They get the satisfaction of participating, of producing real, publicly visible English without the paralyzing fear of constructing the sentence from scratch.
And the psychological impact of hitting post on that comment is profound. They watch the lesson, they type their comment, they hit enter, and immediately their English is out in the real world.
It's a public.
They have successfully communicated in a public forum. The psychological barrier between student and speaker is instantly broken.
And we have to consider the modern landscape of digital learning here, because the comment section under a video like this isn't just an empty void. It functions as a massive, global, virtual classroom.
It really does.
Imagine you are that A1 learner in Brazil. You type, my favorite food is feijoada. And right below you, a B1 learner in Japan types, my favorite food is spicy ramen, and a learner in Germany types, my favorite food is pizza. You are suddenly part of this incredible convergence in a single digital space.
It creates a micro-community built on shared vulnerability. Everyone in that comment section is taking a risk, and doing it asynchronously via text is a stroke of pedagogical genius.
Why is asynchronous so important?
It allows these learners to validate their existence in a new language without the real-time, face-to-face terror of a verbal misstep. If you misspell spaghetti in a YouTube comment, you have time to fix it. Or even if you don't, no native speaker standing right in front of you tapping their foot.
It is a profoundly safe space for trial and error.
It really is. It takes what is historically a very isolating experience, sitting alone in your room, studying a textbook, and turns it into a collective, shared human journey.
And the specific use of those hashtags, hashtag learn English, hashtag English conversation, hashtag study English, it serves a dual purpose.
Right.
It categorizes the content, sure, but for the learner, clicking that hashtag instantly connects them to a massive global ecosystem of millions of other people doing the exact same thing. It is a visual reminder that says, you are not alone in this struggle.
And if we pull the lens all the way back, if we connect this final digital action back to the very first point we made today, it perfectly reinforces the core thesis of the entire curriculum.
Let's bring it all together.
Language is not a math problem. It is not a sterile set of rules to be memorized in a vacuum. Language is an imperfect, messy, biological tool designed for one purpose: human connection. And starting that journey with food sharing, a digital meal, in a comment section with strangers from across the globe is the most fundamentally human way to begin that connection.
That is a brilliant way to synthesize all of this. It really brings us full circle. So let's look back at the expansive journey we've taken today in this deep dive, from that chaotic restaurant table to the global comment section.
It's been a journey.
We started by exploring the biological realities of the A1B1 learner, understanding how using a universal topic like food acts as a low-stress icebreaker. It effectively lowers the affective filter and bypasses the cognitive overload that shuts down the brain.
We moved past the robotic textbook responses to understand the sociology of what's your favorite food, realizing that true fluency requires the actor's trick of tying genuine emotion to rehearsed phrases.
We dove deep into the neuroscience of sensory vocabulary, revealing how words tied to taste and smell hijack the olfactory bulb to anchor themselves permanently in the memory centers of the hippocampus.
We braved the high-stakes theater of ordering at a restaurant, understanding that mastering social pragmatics and surviving that real-world transaction provides a dopamine hit that no textbook can replicate.
We decoded the cultural secret language of idioms, showing how understanding the metaphor behind spilling the beans transforms a learner from an isolated tourist into an invited participant in the culture.
We unpacked the biology of daily practice, seeing how narrative and storytelling physically pave the neural superhighways of the brain through myelination, preventing burnout.
And finally, we saw how a simple, frictionless fill-in-the-blank prompt, "My favorite food is in a digital comment section," can help learners bypass their fear and take that terrifying leap into active, confident communication alongside a global community.
It really is a comprehensive, biologically grounded architecture for fluency, completely disguised as a simple, casual conversation about dinner.
It is a masterclass in hidden pedagogy.
Yeah.
And so to you listening right now, whether you are an A1 beginner just starting to cautiously string nouns together, or a highly advanced speaker brushing up on the conversational basics, I want to remind you of the core takeaway from this deep dive. Language is fundamentally and always about connection. It's not about achieving flawless, sterile grammar. It's not about sounding like a walking dictionary. It's about having the courage to share your stories, your history, your memories, and your favorite spicy dish with another human being. It's about being understood.
And to that end, I want to leave you with a final thought, a practical experiment to try on your own.
I love homework. What is it?
The next time you sit down to eat your favorite meal, whether it's an elaborate multi-course feast, a complex homemade curry, or just a really, really good slice of street pizza, take a moment before you take a bite. Try to describe the entire experience to yourself in English. But don't just list the ingredients like a grocery list. Describe the texture, the smell, the heat. Dig into the memory attached to that flavor. Ask yourself, what story are you really eating?
Oh, I love that. What story are you really eating? Because in the end, that chaotic, noisy, unpredictable restaurant table we talked about at the very beginning, that isn't a place to be feared. That is where the real magic happens. That is where the language actually lives. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep practicing, stay curious, and above all, keep connected. We'll see you next time.